So I want to address an issue that I have been debating for some time. Uh, when I do refurbishments, when I refurbish the Pioneer CTF series cassette decks, for a while I didn't do any recapping on the power supply. Then at one point I received a deck that had problems with the power supply, and I ended up recapping it. And then I thought, well, maybe based on, watching all kinds of other videos on YouTube like Skylabs and others who say recap it no matter what, you're on borrowed time with these older capacitors. I did a lot of research then to learn a little more about the lifetime of capacitors, reforming capacitors. One of my favorite YouTubers is Shango, and I watch him all the time. And he's kind of up in the air sometimes about older capacitors as well. And I'm going to show you just a quick comparison of a brand new capacitor compared then to a pull that I had done from one of the decks that I had refurbished. Now I'm using my trusty tester. I've been using this for years. I also have a multimeter tester. They tend to be pretty much in line. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and test. This is a 50 volt 330 microfarad capacitor that I'm going to go ahead and test, and let's see what it comes up with. This says it's 340 microfarads. Okay, 340 microfarads is well within the 10% variance that you can expect on a 330. So 340 is pretty good. That capacitor, quite frankly, then tests within range. It works. I'm not seeing an issue with it. So I have to question, I pulled it because I was just pulling arbitrarily. Once you pull it, there's a certain logic behind if you're going to go to the work of pulling it. Putting the same one back from a labor standpoint, silly. Go ahead and put a brand new one in place, right? Well, these are new. This is a higher end. I pay more for these. There are a number of reasons. One reason is they're built to when I say explode out, that's sort of redundant, but they're built so that if they do have a problem, they'll actually vent up rather than venting their electrolytic down at the board. This is a 330, 50 volt. Okay, so we're on par in terms of the same value for the capacitor. Now I'm going to go ahead and test this one. All right, so that's 355. This one is 340. This brand new one is 355. And I guess I could probably, run it a few times and then take an average. Now it's 346. This is brand new, so there shouldn't be any kind of reforming happening. Okay, same thing. Now it's 341. Now it's okay, 341 again. So it's measuring pretty much the same as this one. So, I have to set these aside. So I'm going to do that for the moment. So here's another one. Now this is a 50 volt 1000 microfarad. This came out of one of the Pioneers. Physically, there's nothing wrong with it. And the only reason I say that is, when there's a physical problem like it's bulged, then, you have to replace it. It's 1165 microfarad. Okay, so this is supposed to be 1,000. It's 1,165. Now, 10% variance, it's close to 10% variance, but it's a little over. And maybe if I run it a couple of times, it might come back at 64. So I think we're pretty consistent at 1160 something. Okay, again, that's not far enough off to make any real voltage variance differences on the set itself. And then this one, this is a, I guess this is a Kemet or Kmet, I don't know how you pronounce that. 1050. Let's see what it does. Okay, so it's I'll do it again, but it says 993, so it's very close to 1,000. I mean, it's within, no, well, actually, it's 903, so that's 10%. 903. Okay, so this one's over by about 100 microfarads. This is under by about 100 microfarads. Okay, this is brand new. This is 1978. Okay, and it works just fine. Okay, here is a 35 volt 1500. I'm going to test it. All right, so 1596. All right, so that's, if you want 1500 and you have 1596 microfarad, that's pretty good. So let's measure it compared to a brand new Kmet 1535. Okay. $14.40. Okay. 14. Let's run it again. Let's just make sure there's consistency. 1440, 1438 to almost right at 1500. Why would I replace this with this when it's not any better from a value standpoint? Again, this is bothering me a lot, and this is why I'm doing the video. Now this is a 16 volt 220. It's another pull from the power supply. These are, as I said, these are all power supply caps that I have pulled. Okay, so it's 237. Let's give it another try just to make sure we get some average going on here. 239, okay. So that's about 240. This is supposed to be 220. So it's 240. It's a little high. 10% would be, pretty much, it's pretty much in line with 10%. So, can't fault it there. Now, this is a Nichicon 22035, and this one, I can't always get them, but this one's supposed to be audio, which means it's supposed to be a better capacitor and it's supposed to be audio grade. And I think what that means more than anything else is it's going to be more consistent with its rating. Okay, 238. I'll give it another shot. 238, 236, not 220, 236. Okay. Explain to me exactly why this, which is within 10%, I should replace with this, which is also within 10%. It's newer. I get that. But this is working just fine. Again, these are just some of the questions that I have, and I'm sure I'll get in the comments, well, you should always use maybe Nichicon, or you should always use higher quality audio. those are great comments. You can save those comments. You don't have to try to tell me that, because this is audio grade. And if it says 220, why isn't it 220? And by the way, just so that for the people who are going, well, your meter is not a good meter, you should be using, something else that actually does rate it properly, does the work that needs to be done on it, maybe charges it and releases it better than what you had. I do have another meter. Set this one aside, and just so that nobody thinks I'm faking anything out. Okay, this is the audio. Where is it? Trying to do it while it's still connected. 220. That's at 247. Okay, I use this meter to check the other meter, because if one shows something that's really high and the other one shows something that's low, that really doesn't happen. This usually verifies this meter within a few microfarads. They're not perfect. Again, so please don't write in and say, well, you should be using all Nichicon, or you should be using this other. And if there is a different brand that is always spot on, then I want to know about it. But at this point, and I have a beautiful deck that's running like a champ on the bench, and I'm looking at it and I'm listening to it, and I've checked all of the power output from the power supply. Everything's working fine. I'm even considering not recapping the control board, which has been a stalwart for me. I always put there's one problem capacitor. I think it's like a 10 microfarad. That tends to, if it goes out too much, then it can't sense that the reels have stopped. So I'm still very concerned about, and maybe I shouldn't say concerned, maybe the quality that Pioneer built into these early decks was meant to be high quality, and that's a good thing. I have also looked at, and it just occurred to me, somebody else is going to write in and say, well, what's the ESR on these? I didn't show ESR on these. That meter doesn't show it. This one will. But I did think it would be interesting to, and a full disclosure to show, I do get capacitors that are out of compliance pretty significantly. This is a 10 microfarad, 16 volt. And I think it is, I might have to re-record this segment if it doesn't show, but I think it's out of compliance. This is supposed to be 10, and it's coming in at 14. Now, 10% of that would be 11. Okay, this is 14. This, in the control circuit and the control board, this would be a problem. Because if this, and I think it's a 10, that is part of the sensing for end of tape, at 14, you might get 5-10 seconds before it clicks off, where the standard time is 3 seconds. If this in circuit doesn't reform and improve, it will go the other way. And I say the other way, it'll either go higher microfarads open. It could go closed. I've not pulled a single capacitor out of a Pioneer that has gone closed. That is a short. What I have pulled is, something like this that's in picofarads, right? But if I wanted to look at ESR, I can do that too. So while those other capacitors all gave me basically an ESR of 0, and by the way, I do save the capacitors that I pull. Here, let me move that out of the way. There's a nice little container of capacitors that I've pulled from my Pioneer equipment and a little bit of Sony equipment too. There's a nice package. And what I did was I went through these, and even though I pulled some like this one, this was the 220, and we test that. You'll notice that on all of the other ones, the ESR was 0 ohms. This one has a very small V loss. It's 231 microfarad. The actual rating, this is 220, so it's within spec, but that's a pull. I did find some though, and this is more typical. Let's see, I think this is a 10 microfarad. Quite frankly, almost all of these are out of spec. They're usually on the motherboard in the Pioneer units. That's a 1.5 ohm ESR, 13 microfarad. That's pretty close to the 10. I mean, it's still out of spec. So this is usually on, and I'll go ahead and just kind of pick this up and show you. So you see those orange capacitors on the riser boards. That's what that one was. So that's an example of one that clearly, I might target if I'm having trouble with something. But let's try another one. Here's another pull. This one is this is 10 microfarad, and it will present an ESR of some value, not much. It's 0.4 ohms, and it's 11.36. Was it worth pulling? I mean, 11.36, it's just over 10%. I'd pulled it, so I was not going to put that one back in. Here's another example. This is a 10 microfarad, 35. This is a little high. This has an ESR of 0.65. It's 11.62. Again, I pulled it. Now the smaller capacitors, the newer ones, tend to be spot on. I'll show you one of those. If I pull a 10 microfarad, out of this, and this is a brand new resistor or a capacitor. Take the tape off of it. This is a 10 microfarad, but this is brand new, and these are very high quality capacitors. Almost always these measure spot on. See, that's right at 10. Now that's got an ESR of 2.2 ohms, but it's right just under 10 microfarad. So I'll find those are in really good shape. Here's one. This is an example of these are not the best capacitors. These are pretty. These, whatever CZQ is, these tend to be pretty cheapy capacitors. I'll use them depending on what else I have or what I need to do in the circuit. Brand new, but that's got an ESR of 0, and it's right at the rated 1000. I mean, it's 1054. So even brand new out of a box isn't always perfect. Here's one that'll have a bit of an ESR. This is a 1 microfarad. The lower you go, the more likely you are to run into something that's not that does have an ESR. This is a 5.4 ohm, but you know it's 1133 NF, which is 1 microfarad. So even though I pulled it, again, that was a situation where, you know, I'm pulling it, I might as well replace it with a new one. Here's another, which had a lower ESR, by the way. This is another 10. This is a 1.2 ohm ESR, and measures out. It's a 10 microfarad, and I could always use, and I do use my capacitor wizard. Capacitor wizard is a nice tool to have, especially if you are going to, let me kind of straighten this up a little bit because this is going to be hard to test. The capacitor wizard, hang on a sec. Capacitor wizard is nice, you know, and the way you verify this is working is these are ohms, so 1 ohm, 2 ohm, 3 ohm, 4 ohm. You just take a 1 ohm resistor and test it with across the leads, and if it measures 1, then the capacitor wizard is working. This is normally for in circuit testing, and I use it all the time for the Pioneers whenever I have a question about a capacitor. But it's really testing ESR. So if I take this one that was giving me about 1 ohm, I get 1 ohm ESR on the capacitor wizard. Here's another, and I love my capacitor wizard, but it's not, you know, it's good enough to tell you when to compare and when not to. This is another one. This says it's good. If I test it to see, and again, remember, capacitor wizard, it has its limitations. You need to read the manual. If I test it here, it's a 1108 microfarad, but it's a 0.44 ohm ESR, and you can tell there's some ESR here. If you'll notice, you know, it's between 1 and 0.5 on that meter, but you know, you've got you do have some resistance coming across. Here's another one. This is a 1 microfarad. Again, 1 microfarad are really, you know, you're down at a point where it's really a close measure. See, this is 12 microfarad essentially, but it's a 4.7 ohm ESR. Well, the capacitor, see, he says, capacitor wizard says it's an ESR of somewhere between 1 and 2, 1.5 ohms. This says it's an ESR of 4.7 ohms. We're going to try it again, just see if it, yeah, it's agreeing. So, you know, again, now this one which is supposed to be 1 microfarad, it's coming in at 1.2. So, you know, getting that one replaced. And here's a bipolar 4.7. I don't know what that one measured. Let's see. The bipolar ones usually tend to be fine, but I replace them anyway if I'm taking them out. It's got an ESR of 2.5. The bipolar I replaced it with had no ESR. So this one at 4388. So again, this is a 4.7, right? 4388 isn't so bad. ESR on it is right at 2. This says 2.5. This says right at 2. So, you know, doesn't mean it's bad, but definitely means, if you find that your other bipolar that you're going to replace it with is less than that, less ESR, then of course that's what you go with. And just for fun, looking at a bipolar, let's see, I have several bipolar that replace that one. It's a 4.7. I think this is Russian made, which wouldn't be popular these days. Let's see what that does. It's a 1.7 ohm. It's 5104. Okay, so this is supposed to be 4.7 microfarad. It's coming in at 51. And then the ESR, that's about right, 1.7. It says 1.7 here. It's between 1 and 2 there. And so that ESR was better than the 4.7 that I pulled, right? So that was the 4.7 that I pulled. So the pull, which is this purple one, was replaced with a Russian made that had a better ESR, but was not necessarily better in terms of the rating. And that's where I had to make a choice. I do have better, I've been buying, now that I was able to find them, I was having a tough time finding some bipolar that were of quality, but now I've got some bipolars like this one. I want to say this might be Panasonic. This is a nice, better quality bipolar, 4.7. Let's see what it does. It should give us a better rating than the Russian made one. Yeah, see, 4638. I mean, that's 4.7. ESR is 1.4 ohms. Let's see what the capacitor wizard says. Capacitor wizard says, well, see, it says 1. So while, yeah, this says 1.4, that says 1. This is a better, this one is what we want to replace this bipolar. And you'll find these purple ones all throughout the motherboard of the CTF series Pioneer cassette decks. So there you go. I know I've spent a lot of time on this, but again, as I said, talk to me. Tell me what you think about my assertion that certainly the bigger capacitors, not necessarily these small ones. These small ones do have an effect on the operations from the control board on the CTF series Pioneers. They do have an effect on the audio on the motherboard. So when they are out of whack, they do affect other parts of the audio circuitry. But as I said, when we looked at those larger capacitors that I pull from the power supply, 0 ESR, almost bang on with the values. Tell me what you think about maybe not replacing them so regularly as I have been. Thanks again.